The outlook for the Chinese economy at the moment is extremely poor. Right the way across the board, people are slashing growth forecasts. And for the near term, that makes sense, but people do expect it to pick back up again longer term, and I ask why? What is going to change that suddenly turns that profile around? I don't see it, and I think it looks at the moment, unless something changes, very similar to what some people, including myself, were saying years ago, which is the Chinese economy would start to look more like the Japanese economy.
What do you mean by that?
Very low growth, as far as the eye can see.
What is the biggest risk to the Chinese economy right now? Is it the property market?
Yes and no. The Chinese property market is in real trouble. Everyone can see that, and that's been obvious for years, except for the people trying to sell you, financialist interests in the Chinese property market. There's too much debt right the way across the board. China produces too much of just about everything. It doesn't have enough demand at home for it. It can't possibly sell everything to the rest of the world because we increasingly want to onshore or produce things for ourselves. And you have too much credit card debt, too much mortgage debt, too much corporate debt, too much government debt. If everyone's in debt, how do you get out of it?
I want to ask you about some comments by Mike Henry, the BHP CEO, who we heard from last week with regards to its reporting. He said that he expects China to remain a stable customer of our iron ore. Do you agree with that?
No. I think it's a very optimistic view, to put it mildly, because on the first level, the Chinese economy doesn't need as much iron ore as it's buying now already, given what you see in the property market, given they don't need to build much more infrastructure. They've built years and years and years ahead of where they need to be. So that's just on the demand side. But then if you read the Chinese press or people who are closer to China and their analysis, China is openly talking about setting up one central planned state mechanism to buy iron ore from everybody, A, to try and force the price lower, but B, as a semi-step back to a sort of planned economy. And alongside that, they're talking about subsidizing local iron ore production, which is more expensive and lower quality. But hey, you can subsidize local jobs, particularly if your economy is flat. And B, buying more from other countries, such as, for example, Brazil or future mines that they're developing in Africa. So medium term, no, I don't see that view at all holding.
So if it doesn't hold, when will that flow through into Australia's bottom line?
Well, that's the magic question. But certainly if you're taking a medium-term view as the CEO of a corporation that does nothing but iron ore, that has to be a cliff edge you can see in front of you at some point in the future. It may not be a story for 2023. It may not even be 2024. But once you start getting to the middle of this decade, absolutely, that hole is there in front of you.
If we can move to the Ukraine, we spoke around 6 months ago when Russia invaded the Ukraine, and you painted three possible scenarios. That first one was a short disruptive war with some economic pain. The second one was sanctions with economic pain. And the third was sanctions on those who also trade with Russia and severe economic pain. Where do you think we have landed?
Well, we're definitely in scenario 2, where it's an extended war with sanctions flying around left, right and centre. We've probably got 1 foot towards scenario 3, where it's all against all and the global order starts fraying. I don't think we're going to go any further than that for now, but of course we have new geopolitical flashpoints that are starting to emerge which could drag us in that general direction. And that speaks to something else that we said in that report, which is that this is a global problem and Ukraine is one facet of that global problem, and it's going to only get more complicated from here.
We know that the invasion caused huge ructions for supply of certain commodities, being particularly energy commodities as well as grains and fertilisers, etc. Where is that at now, and how do you see that playing out as the winter approaches in Europe?
Well, it depends on the commodity. Some of them have come back down from the peaks we saw during the war, particularly some key food staples. So that's positive for the importer. If you look at energy in Europe, it's an absolute catastrophe. A catastrophe. Like wholesale energy prices in Europe, electricity prices are up 8-fold, 10-fold, depending on where you're looking. And there's no sign at the moment of that coming down. And the industrial impact of that is devastating. So this is going to be an incredibly, incredibly difficult winter for Europe.
And then given that, finally, if I can ask you, how might that impact, either perpetuate the idea of a recession, a global recession?
Well, in Europe, it's baked into the cake if you look at that kind of energy price push. In the United Kingdom, the Bank of England is openly saying, yes, deep recession and then years of sluggish growth on the other side. And I think these are realistic forecasts. If you look at the disruption that we have on the supply side, you look at that cost increase in electricity and in food and rising interest rates to boot on top of that, you'll be doing very well to avoid a recession.
Michael Every, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.